So as for the question, would I recommend the book? Absolutely. It was easy to read and great for anyone who enjoyed things like The Hunger Games. And I would say that for anyone who lived through that cheesy vampire stage, don't be put off by the vampires. Hi everyone, my name is Tahereh Westwell and today is Tuesday, which means it's time to discuss our Panic at the Book Club book of the week, which is Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. If you like romance, fantasy, or even thriller, basically anything fiction book related, then I suggest you head on over to the channel's intro video, where you can find out more information on how you can take part in this online book club. We announce books at least 4 weeks in advance, and we accept your bookish feedback in a wide manner of ways. Post your comment below a video, send in a voice note, or even send me a short video clip of you discussing the book. Alternatively, you can just send me a direct message. The adopted human daughter of Nightborn vampire king, Tahereh carved a place for herself in a world designed to kill her. Her only chance to become something other than prey is to enter the Shatter, a legendary tournament held by the goddess of death herself. But winning won't be easy. Pitting Tahereh against the most vicious warriors of all 3 vampire houses. In order to survive, she'll be forced to make an alliance with a mysterious rival. Everything about Rain is dangerous. He's a ruthless vampire, an efficient killer, an enemy to her father's crown, and her greatest competition. Yet what terrifies Tahereh the most is that she finds herself oddly drawn to him. But there is no room left for compassion in the Shatter, and there's nothing more dangerous than love. This is the spoiler-free section, where first we'll discuss any spoiler-free points before moving on to a clearly marked section of the video which will contain spoilers and more specifics about the book. There hasn't been a book club episode for like 2 weeks. I was kind of off getting married and everything, but still it feels like it's been ages. Not long enough though to forget that first things first, the chapter lengths. Most of them were around the ideal 10 to 15 pages. But with 56 chapters and around 564 pages, it wasn't exactly a short read. Which isn't exactly out of the ordinary for fantasy, and like most romantasy books, it didn't really seem to matter how long it was because I still flew through it. And like most romantasy books, this one was a slow burn. I used to really believe that I didn't really like slow burn romance, but I think that might have been a straight up lie. With most of the romantasy books I like, the romance doesn't tend to actually happen until the second half of the book. A Shadow in the Ember, Fourth Wing, Powerless, Once Upon a Broken Heart, and now this one with the painfully long title, Serpent and the Wings of Night. I may have enjoyed the book's contents, but its name just sort of seemed to refuse to stick in my mind. The book had a lot of context and world building, although maybe not to the same extent that an epic fantasy would. I mean, it didn't take 5 pages to describe what a mountain looked like. And there could have been more of that, like there could have been more of a perspective on the political side of things, but this was the first book in a series, and I have no doubt there will be more of that in the next ones. It was super easy to read, tense, and I also really liked the characters. Although I wouldn't say that any of it was super surprising, there were a lot of twists that I really enjoyed. Like, the book didn't seem to take any of the super obvious routes that it could have gone down. I think it was a good balance between keeping you guessing and eager to find out what's going to happen next, while still having a lot of those more predictable elements. I think growing up and reading a lot during a time where cheesy vampire books were everywhere, I still kind of expect vampire books to be really corny. But instead, I think that this one was a really interesting take on a human girl living in this world that is dominated by vampires without it feeling too Twilight. It just felt a little bit more flushed out and more adult, and not just because it did have a little bit of spice. You know, it's a lot less about romanticizing vampires and more about this tough young woman surviving in a fucked up world, and I really enjoyed that. If I had to compare this to any book, it would probably be The Hunger Games but with vampires, or maybe something like Powerless but a little less suitable for anyone who's under the age of 18. I do really like how this deadly games trope has become so popular, and they still all have their own twists and unique take on it. Moving on to that part of the video where I suggest if you haven't read this book yet, go do that first, because beyond this point there will definitely be spoilers. So, obviously, the love interest wasn't exactly hard to immediately work out, but was I expecting the ending? Like, I wasn't not surprised. Like, obviously, I knew there must have been a pretty big reason for Rain to be taking part in the Kajari, but the ending was just a lot more than I was expecting. It also kind of makes me a little suspicious that we're in for another slow burn in the next book, because although I could see why Rain did everything he did, and he was clearly willing to give it all up for Araya, but I think that's just quite a lot to move past. Which I'm not exactly happy about. I know that I did just admit that maybe I do actually like a slow burn, but we already did that. We already got to the romance part, and now we have to do it all again? Now I feel betrayed. I mean, other than their relationship taking a huge hit there in the end, I loved their character development and the relationship growth between the two. It would be nice to know why Rain does seem so different to other vampires. Like, is that just because he's a turned vampire, or maybe it's just because of how Araya grew up? Like, maybe she was just surrounded by some of the worst. Like, she hadn't actually been very far from the palace before. Or maybe it's just like a personality thing, like humans, I guess. But I am really curious as to where the relationship's gonna go from that ending. I don't really know how I felt about Vincent. Like, he was obviously a bad person, but I guess he wasn't a person at all, and I have no doubt that he did to some degree care for Araya. And from what I gathered, it's not exactly in a vampire's nature to love like that, even their own children. He also just must have known more about Araya's magic than he originally let on. I mean, pretty early on, I was suspicious of the real reason as to why Vincent wanted to be connected to Araya in the way that she originally was going to ask the god. Because then he would have access to Araya's power, and maybe she's a lot more powerful than we realise. And if he was threatened by Araya and still loved her, then maybe this was his solution, because it was quite common for vampires to kill or hurt other family members that they were threatened by. I mean, obviously assuming that Araya is Vincent's biological daughter, is that it? Like, maybe there's some god blood or something in there. Like, we know next to nothing about Araya's real mum. I mean, was Vincent really threatened just because she was a half vampire? Like, why would being half vampire mean that she's potentially more powerful than him? Like, I don't know. Maybe we'll find out more about the rest of her family in the next books. I mean, part of my reasoning for being suspicious was because of a flashback between Vincent and Tahereh. I mean, her whole life she's been told that she is weaker and she is constantly in danger of vampires and she's got all these human flaws. She's constantly in a fight for survival. So when she turns around and says, well, can't you just change me? That would fix all of our problems. Vincent turns around and goes, nah, that's too dangerous. But you know what you could do? You could join these deadly games, be the only human there against strong vampires, where there can only be one survivor, and there's no way that you can prepare for this because there's no way for us to know exactly how you'll be tested.
That's weird.
I mean, I get that she was fairly well prepared, like the best she could be, but are you really telling me that Vincent's best argument was that her odds were better fighting in a deadly game for the gods than it was to be turned? Like, it just seemed really weird. Like, I'm not willing to risk your life in that way, but I am willing to risk your life in a very long-winded, traumatic way where there's no way for us to predict the outcome. Like, the guy was definitely hiding something. Still, I'm not sure that it would make the traumatic death or the betrayal of Vincent and Rain any easier on Tahereh. I do think that the spicy scenes, or the spicy scene, because I guess there was only one, was written quite well. I will say that it did go on for quite a while, but because there was only the one scene and it added to context, character development, their relationship, and it did add to the story, I think it got away with it. I'm also really curious as to what the House of Blood is up to. Although I really enjoyed this book just by itself, I think it was also a really good setup for the other ones. So as for the question, would I recommend the book? Absolutely. It was easy to read and great for anyone who enjoyed things like The Hunger Games. And I would say that for anyone who lived through that cheesy vampire stage, don't be put off by the vampires. It isn't a cheesy glorification on vampirism. It's more about this messed up world and characters as individuals rather than this romantic notion of vampires. So, will I be reading any more by Carissa Broadbent? There are so many things that I want to know and figure out, politically, world building, characters, and relationship wise. I can't wait to read the second one in the series. However, unfortunately, the third one's not even out yet, so I will have to wait beyond that. But let me know what you thought. Did you enjoy the book? Next week, we're discussing Do No Harm by Jack Jordan, so don't forget to get your comments and thoughts in by Monday the 19th of August at the latest to be a part of the discussion. You can now do this on YouTube, TikTok, or Instagram. The following week will be Shatter Me, but don't forget if you do need a little bit longer to read a book, we do now list the next 4 books down below along with the discussion dates. That way you can choose the genre that best suits you, and the best time frame to read it in. Thank you all for joining, and if you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It is always appreciated, and I will see you next week. Bye.